Now, I'm sure that I'm not alone in this, but with this whole end of the world, slow, burning apocalypse, I've started to think about many themes in horror cinema in entirely different ways. And not just horror cinema either, but video games, literature, even some of the more morbid sides of Twitter. And there seems to be one underlying theme that underpins the entire sense of fear that I think that we're all feeling. It's one central thread that weaves its way through the linen of our shared anxiety. Isolation. While this pandemic has made me think about many themes and scenes in cinema, as well as many other things that I certainly won't be making any YouTube videos about, it's made me think about one movie scene in particular, in 2001's weirdo little brother of a post-punk melancholy movie, Donnie Darko. Now, I don't make any bones about this, Donnie Darko has long been one of my favourite movies of all time, and while I'm still not entirely sure what it's about, there is one scene that's been playing on my mind recently. It's the one where Donnie finally coaxes Roberta Sparrow, aka Grandma Death, away from her mailbox just long enough to catch a glimpse of the void that she's been staring at for all these years, and she whispers one chilling line to him, and only to him. Every living creature on Earth dies alone. Yeah, maybe you can guess where this is going. The thing is, while Donnie Darko remains to be one of the most incomprehensible movies of the early 2000s, and is still a film that's quite happy to be pretentious in its lack of resolution, that line from Grandma Death is unashamedly blunt. I mean, how more direct can a line of dialogue be when it comes to mortality? You see, there's been quite a lot of debate about what Grandma Death meant when she whispered that line to Donnie. Even still, there are Tumblr posts and blogs about the inner workings of the scene, but whether she meant something deeper or more obtuse or perhaps even more hopeful, I'm not sure if that's entirely the point. Because in a film that is a literal jumble of quantum entanglement, in reality, that one ultimate truth is the only clear message in Donnie Darko. Later, when Donnie is discussing the encounter with his therapist, Dr. Lillian Thurman, played by the remarkably comforting Catherine Ross, she asks him whether the search for God is absurd after being confronted with Roberta Sparrow's words in her own way. Donnie's answer is a little less clear. The search for God is absurd if everyone dies alone, and we can probably forgive him for being under the influence of hypnosis, but while he's riffing on that point, he also talks about his pet dog and how his dog goes under his porch to die alone. Again, despite the airs of philosophy and psychotherapy, in a subconscious existential encounter captured on film, we can't get any more clear than a dead dog dying beneath a porch, right? And that's where we get to the isolation part and the theme that horror cinema really serves to hammer home. Sure, Donnie Darko isn't exactly a horror film, but it's a piece of cinema that I think successfully served to circumnavigate horror's most important theme: being alone in the face of adversity, just like we are now behind closed doors facing down a global apocalypse. It may sound obvious, but the masters of horror knew early on that isolating the audience was the first step into breaking down their walls of comfort. Hey, maybe that's the reason that we subconsciously feel compelled to watch horror movies in the dark. Two opening scenes immediately come to mind when I think of stepping into the isolated viewpoint of an audience: Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and John Carpenter's The Thing. The most obvious, of course, is Kubrick's helicopter shadow-ridden 2-minute panoramic sequence, which is arguably one of the most compelling and convincing moments in the entire movie. It's bleak, it's almost resonant of a spaghetti western with few ingredients needed to allow us a bird's eye view into what is essentially a story about a man seeking isolation in order to write a book. The result is staggeringly simple. We watch as the vistas and sweeping pines of Glacier National Park pass beneath us as we patiently, yet ominously catch the movements of a vehicle moving below. Reportedly, Kubrick's demands for this scene were uncharacteristically simple, and according to chief camera operator Jeff Blythe, there were no specifics needed for the scene other than a yellow Volkswagen with Colorado plates. Everything else was open to the crew's interpretation. Now, you could argue that this was some oversight on Kubrick's part, or perhaps he just didn't deem anything else to be necessary, but when you apply this aerial sequence to the script and you delve into the pre-existing background work that Kubrick meticulously put into these opening few minutes, it all kind of makes sense. By the time location scouting was finished, Kubrick knew Glacier National Park like the back of his hand. He had people in the field for months on end, sending back footage of various valleys and lakes, mountain shots of the Montana Rockies, communicating both the beauty, but most importantly the isolation of the landscape. Kubrick knew that all this sequence needed was the bare bones because he'd already had his crew exploring the area alone. They'd felt firsthand the loneliness of the scene, and that's something that needs no subtext or surface understanding. It's primal. And of course, no matter how comfortable we convince ourselves that we are when we're isolated from society and civilization, when applied to the motivation of a horror movie, it's undeniably the most effective way to lead us into that mindset. The more extreme side of that setting is, of course, in John Carpenter's The Thing, a film set in perhaps the most isolated environment on our planet, Antarctica. You see, Carpenter's choice of setting the film in the South Pole and instead sticking more firmly to the source material of John W. Campbell's 1938 horror novella Who Goes There is something that certainly can't be understated. The original 1951 adaptation, The Thing from Another World, directed by Christian Nyby, is of course set in Alaska, a region that is, at least in some ways, closer to civilization than some unnamed research base on a frozen continent. So then, it would make sense that in this aerial opening sequence, the perspective is somewhat reversed. Although we're aware of the Norwegian helicopter soaring across an endless expanse of white, our first line of sight is instead planted firmly on the ground, surrounded by nothing but ice and snow, removed from the opportunity to escape. Although in many ways the indicators are incredibly subtle, it's in this nuance of perspective that both Kubrick and Carpenter find their achievements in the film's isolation. Somewhere in the back of our minds, watching these sequences play out, our anxiety of being cut off from the world begins to reveal itself. Slowly but surely, we know that there is a sense of dread in being isolated. Sure, there are many of us who find solace in craving their own kind of isolation. You only need to watch shows like Alone or Life Below Zero and you'll get a sense of why certain personality types feel that need to shut themselves away from society, or perhaps retreat to a place where they feel comfortable enough to keep society at a distance. But when we apply that same imperative to these situations in horror, the terms and conditions are somewhat shifted. If you've ever seen any of these survival shows, you'll know that ultimately their isolation is only ever on their terms. And in times of crisis, be it a physical or emotional injury, their first port of call is the nearest town, society. It reminds me of another opening scene that I feel fits perfectly into this theme, in Robert Eggers' 2015 folk horror, The Witch. Now, for those of you that have followed my other projects, you'll know that The Witch is one of my favourite horror movies of recent decades, and although this film's opening scene is often overlooked, I feel that it perfectly highlights the same detachment from society found in both Kubrick and Carpenter's work. Of course, Robert Eggers' prime directive in this movie was to offer a visual smorgasbord of North American and European folklore, with of course the overarching theme of horror being deliciously lived pacts with the devil. But it could also be argued that the film's true evil crept in much earlier than we may have expected, when a family of 7 were banished from society on a whim. Take a closer look at The Witch's opening sequence and tell me that Ralph Ineson doesn't absolutely nail both the anger and the underlying fear and frustration of a father that has damned his own family. Now, there's obviously a lot going on here, and you could argue that William's confrontation with the Puritan judges is a dig at the whole sins of the father, letting the devil creep in and damning them all to hell in his own special kind of way. But where I think Robert Eggers truly succeeds here is in the scene's lack of exposition. All we know throughout the entire movie is that William and his family are being removed from society, no matter who was right or wrong in this argument, and within just a little over 2 minutes of screen time, they're packed up on a cart and the town gates are closing behind them. What went we out into this wilderness to find, leaving our country, kindred, our fathers' houses? Given the fact that it's sometime in the 1630s and these New England settlers have travailed a vast ocean on the promise of religious prosperity, yeah, you could say that isolation from society is already their ultimate horror. In making The Witch, and as a debut horror nonetheless, Eggers frequently remarked that his goal was to explore the role of the anti-mother in society, the witch, an ambivalent figure that traditionally has already been outcast and isolated from civilization. And although The End Result is clearly an incredibly well-made genre movie, again, the subtleties of isolation that Eggers threads throughout his opening sequence is masterfully met. And that's where we can bring these threads back to Roberta Sparrow's words in Donnie Darko, that every living creature ultimately dies alone. Jack Torrance, a man craving isolation, first for his own peace and ultimately from his own family, finds his death frozen and alone, trapped inside a maze of his own making. Sure, we can probably overlook the fact that he finds his ultimate solace with a hotel's worth of ghosts, but hey, that's by the by. And then in The Thing, we find a similar fate for MacReady and Childs, both of whom have already accepted the fact that they'll probably die alone, despite the fact that their mistrust is the only thing keeping them apart. You know, originally Bill Lancaster's first draft of the script had Charles and Mac finally turning into The Thing, only for them to be rescued by a helicopter crew in the spring, where they then presumably infected the world and brought an end to human civilization as we know it. But John Carpenter, being the true master of horror that he is, he decided that there was an opportunity for MacReady and Childs to undertake the ultimate heroic act by slowly and painfully freezing to death in the middle of the Antarctic in order to save humanity from an infection. In an act of unparalleled sacrifice in what is otherwise a bleak and hopeless moment, the two men accept their isolation to ultimately save society. Maybe, just maybe, the trauma is in having to accept our isolation when it comes, just like MacReady and Charles did when everything was collapsing and burning around them. Sometimes, maybe we just have to sit here and wait for a little while, see what happens. Hello horror fans, what the hell is going on? Yeah, you've probably got a few questions, but don't worry about them. First and foremost, thank you very much for sticking around all the way until the end of that video. I know it was quite a long one, but I put a lot of time and effort into discussing how I feel isolation is affecting all of us at the moment. So yeah, probably got a lot of questions. This is my brand new channel, and if you want to see more videos, make sure to hit that subscribe bar. You know how it is. It feels good. It feels nice to be able to make some new videos for you guys. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. Whatever. My name's Jack Finch. This is my brand new channel. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say so far. Yeah, make sure to hit that subscribe bell. And until next time, you take it easy.